Welcome back to the program. If you're just joining us, this is Bottomline Africa right here on KTN News. Now, before we start our studio discussion tonight, which has everything to do with corruption in the continent, Sudanese British business mogul and philanthropist Mo Ibrahim says people outside Africa are those that fuel the much talked about corruption in the continent. He was speaking on the sidelines of the second Africa Convergence Summit held in the Moroccan city of Casablanca. Ibrahim, who is the president of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, was a guest speaker while admitting that there is corruption in Africa, as is the case the world over. Ibrahim slams corrupt business practices, which caused the continent to lose huge sums of money while people continue to live in poverty. Now, before I bring in both Mark Bichachi and Taye Belgun, let's look at some facts and figures about corruption in Africa. Nearly 75 million people, that is in sub-Saharan Africa, are said to be estimated to have paid a bribe in the past year alone. 58% say that corruption has increased over the past year. A very interesting number there. And out of 28 governments, 18 are seen as completely failing to address corruption. Police and business executives are seen to have the highest levels of corruption in the continent. And 22% of Africans who came into contact with the public service in the past 12 months said they paid a bribe. Now, bribery also affects more than 1 in 5 Africans and hurts the poor people most. Now, let's go straight to a conversation tonight as we try to establish contact with Taye Belgun, who is going to join us shortly from Kigali, Rwanda. Of course, Taye is a representative of Africans Rising, an organization that is, it's a pan-African organization that is aimed to tackle all these stereotypes related to Africa. But now we have Mark Bichachi, a political analyst. Mark, good evening. Good to see you. Welcome to the program.
Nice to see you too, Yusuf. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, let's begin. Before we talk about what Mo Ibrahim said yesterday about corruption in Africa, let's try and analyze what is happening in Kenya and, by extension, these other African countries where institutions meant to fight corruption, case in point, EACC in Kenya, are said to have, they don't receive enough support from the government of the day. Not just long ago, we've seen EACC saying they don't have enough personnel to tackle corruption in the country.
One of the key mistakes that we make in Africa is we keep thinking that we can legislate around corruption. Corruption is a moral disease. It is quite difficult, actually, to investigate corruption. It is even more difficult to prove corruption in a court of law. And if you've seen in the case of Brazil and South Korea, where they have persecuted their respective presidents, it took quite a while to investigate. However, there was a high degree of personal responsibility and societal expectation for them to be persecuted. And this is where the problem lies in Africa. Most Africans do not consider bribery a crime, and neither do they consider it a moral misnomer. They don't consider it like they've done anything wrong. Therefore, the society has the back of a lot of the people who are corrupt. Number two, that leads into low political willpower to actually deal with that. And then even further, then these institutions have even less power to be able to persecute because there's no public input into the persecution of these particular cases.
Yeah.
So it is not just political, it is also a matter of the political space not being there, and also as a society, we tolerate a lot of corruption, and whenever it is about me, I'm willing to bribe just to get quicker.
And Mark, allow me to bring Taye into the conversation now. Taye, I believe you can hear me now. Good evening and welcome to the show. Now, we've been talking about, of course, corruption matters right in the program, and we all know that corruption changes, it mutates, it comes in various forms. Do you think there's need for African governments to empower these institutions meant to fight corruption?
Thank you for having me, and good evening. I completely do agree with that narrative. But who are the African governments? I think, these are made up of human beings like us. These are people who tend to, be fighting for something that's, when they get to the position that they are, they feel like they don't want to be, touched anymore. And this has been, a reoccurrence. And when you find, corruption, it takes two to tango. The folks who are, who are supposedly should be the fighters also get corrupted during the process. And therefore, we are certainly worried about, some of this institution that has been created solely for this particular reason.
Well said, Ty, and Mark. There's something interesting I found out today, that most francophone countries have the president of the judiciary as the head of state. He doubles up. He's the head of state and at the same time is the president of the judiciary. I know that is not the case here in Kenya because, of course, the chief justice is the president there. Do you think with this kind of scenarios, the corruption in this continent will even worsen?
You know, I have had the distinct privilege of working in various African countries. And one of the things I'll tell you, Yusuf, is we keep trying to solve corruption via institutions, via the judiciary. Now, in all the African countries I've been to, and that's nearly half of the African countries, I'll tell you for free, it has not worked. It has not worked in Francophone Africa. It's not working in Anglophile Africa. It's not working anywhere. And the reason why it's not working is we do not hold each other, not just our leaders, each others to a moral standard. If a corrupt politician comes with money to church tomorrow, we will give him the microphone to talk. If a corrupt politician shows up at your door and he's got money to buy your land, you will sell him your land. So the issue is not institutions. The issue is that as African people, we've not stood up to hold ourselves to an account to a higher moral standard. And therefore, you cannot police morality because you cannot police me up to my bedroom. And that's why the police are seen to be the most corrupt, because they are the most likely civil servants that you will meet as you go through your day-to-day businesses. And if the police are corrupt, then it goes right up the chain all the way to the top. So what needs to happen? We need to bring Africa to a place where we as Africans, devoid of the influence of the West and Europe, begin to ask ourselves the question that if we want a better Africa, can we continue to accept corruption at whichever level? That's the solution. It's not judicial.
Well said. Now, Ty, the various initiatives that have been put forward by both the government and civil societies to tackle corruption in the continent, among them is the Transparency Index. Do you think African countries are embarrassed when they're ranked lowly? I'm sure your organization is also aimed at combating corruption in a way. How effective is it?
I mean, like I said earlier, I think mostly we are going in a circle as a continent, and it's a very big shame because that's the reason why a lot of Africans are also losing. They're losing trust when it comes to civil society. We've completely lost trust in some of our governments, and civil society also is getting into that spectrum, and that's the reason why movements are now getting attention across the continent, looking into how do we like a problem of illicit financial flow when you have quite a number of our money being taken away from the continent and is being somewhere in the West. And some of this money, we don't even have a track record of it. Some of this, political politicians or our so-called leaders actually die without we can't even trace those money. And these are money that can actually do so much for the development of our nation, for our community, and as a continent as well. And also, the government usually put in the very hungry people in a decision-making space, whereas they know that these are people that they can easily corrupt. When you find rich men, if you find rich men as judges, as a committee that has been founded by the government, and you find rich people sitting on that position to be able to give judgment for a particular thing or a particular case that has been happening, then it's a viable thing to do. But when you have wretched-minded people who are very poverty-minded themselves, who are sitting in a position where they have to make a decision, when something like that comes in, they are afraid to even make a decision.
Yes.
They are very afraid to even think about how do I even adjourn or judge this person. And before you know it, they're also being threatened. these are people, these are ordinary people who, you know, work their way up to that position.
Well,
and,
well,
you know,
well said.
government has the power to silence those people. And that's the reason why we don't have good judiciary system on the continent at the moment.
Well said, Ty. I see you, Mark, shaking your head. Of course, you're going to react to that shortly. But before that, let me just take you straight to what Mo Ibrahim said as he blamed both the West and the East for the corruption in the continent. This is what he said, quote unquote, "I think the corruption of Africa is taken totally out of context. Africa is no more corrupt than any other place around us. For every African leader who was corrupt, we have 1,000 European, American, and Chinese business people who are corrupt." What are you reading in this? Are you seeing some sort of a blame game here?
Let me just answer Ty a little bit and tell him there are some very good poor people who are incorruptible, and there are some very bad rich people who are absolutely corruptible, because the scale of poverty and wealth is a sliding scale. So at what point do I have enough money to be uncorruptible? That's quite misleading. I don't think, I know quite a lot of very wealthy people who will very well gladly receive a bribe, however small, and would gladly give it out.
Yes.
Now, to Mo Ibrahim statements, the honest truth is corruption is not an African vice, it is a worldwide vice. The Europeans are known to be as corrupt as Africans in many occasions, and when it comes to macro corruption, the large-scale corruption, of course, a lot of the corruption that happens in Africa is occasioned by foreign companies and foreign individuals who come into the country to corrupt that system. But for corruption to exist, it also means that we as Africans have fostered an environment by which these hawks that fly in from Europe and Asia are able to come and chew on the carcass of the African economy. We are in the business of killing our own economies, and yet we want to blame the vultures that be from coming to eat from us. The thing is that there's responsibility on both sides of the divide. There's the responsibility on the person receiving and the person giving the bribe. And what do we need to do? What we need to do as Africans is begin to decide the same way the Europeans decided after the Second World War, the same way the Asian tigers decided after the mid-60s and mid-70s, and decided, you know what, let's do what is best for our country. Let's begin to think, how can we invest in a manner that 10 years from now we will have result? One of the reasons why corruption is rife in Africa is Africa has really short-term wealth plans. We are always talking about now. Very few African countries are able to talk about the future. And once you are able to talk about the future, that's when you're able to save. That's when you're able to make decisions that are for the better of the country. But if you are thinking about now, then we have to play into the very famous Kenyan term called tumbocracy, or other words, kleptocracy becomes the order of the day.
Well said. Now Ty, I believe you've seen that report by Mo Ibrahim. Do you agree with him that the West and the East are also equally culpable when it comes to corruption?
Absolutely. Whatever we've learned today as Africans is not something that, you know, I would not 100% blame them on it, but I mean, everything that we've learned today, you know, based on democracy and, you know, policy and all those things, even corruption, we learned it from them. And, you know, having said that, it's very easy for them to also edit or juggle around or restructure some of the corrupt practices or system that they've created on the continent. Just to back to, you know, I mean, when you look at the countries holding some of our corrupt leaders, I mean, there was a Nigerian politician that was found with tons and millions of dollars in his house in London. And I mean, if the money has been taken back to Nigeria, I'm sure a lot of people will have benefited from it. There's, you know, there are different corruption practices even in Tunisia, in many countries on the continent. I think we need to now start looking at if you as the West take us very seriously and you take our development very seriously, we don't need NGOs. More NGOs coming up into this continent. We just need to give us, now that we've realized that someone amongst us have stole this money, kindly just give it back to us so that we can use it for our development, and
Yes.
even give us this money as in a well-structured way that we can actually make use of it. And I guess that's what Mo Ibrahim is trying to say, because you can't come into a continent where we have so much human and natural resources and tell us that we're corrupt, where some of us have not even eaten. And the reason why I mentioned about the rich folks, when you look at there's a saying that you don't give a man with a flat belly too much money, because he would definitely want to feed his stomach first, as opposed to if you give a man with a pot belly, he's already filled up, so you would just keep the rest. So we need to also understand that most of these politicians, most of these people who are in the seats to make decisions, are folks that have flat pot bellies. They are hungry. When they get there, they only take care of themselves first and their family before they even think about making a decision that can actually create a change or impact a change within their own community. And
let me bring Mark in now. Mark, where can someone decide who is greedy and who is not? And we're talking about there's a certain spectrum in the society who are greedy. Are we talking about those in the leadership, or are we talking about the common people, members of the public?
The truth of the matter, let's understand this. And I'll take some societal roots here. Number one, it says the love of money is the root of all evil. That's one. Number two, there is something that never says enough, and that's the grave. So one of the things that we need to understand about the human condition is that the human condition never gets to a point where it says enough, especially when you love money. There are people who've taken bribes of $100 million and still continues to take another bribe after that one. So the reality of the matter, greed is this. Greed is any time and any instance I want to take a shortcut towards self-gratification at the expense of others. That's what it is. And it applies to every cadre of society. If I go to passport control today, and because I want my passport tomorrow, I'm willing to give a bribe, I'm being greedy about myself because I am jumping the queue and inconveniencing many other people so that I can go ahead fast. That is corruption. If I do $100 million deal and give a deal to a foreign company versus a local company, I'm being selfish in the terms of I have put my success before other people. So greed can only be measured to the extent to which I'm willing to make other people unsatisfied, they go hungry so that I can go ahead. Whether that is about 100 Kenya shillings or $1 million, it is corruption, whichever the state.
Now, Taya, you've talked about influence from these Western countries and the East when it comes to corruption in Africa. But case in point, a country like Kenya loses 600 billion shillings every year from its budget to corruption. Don't you think in some situation, actually in most situations, African countries, I mean, these governments are the enemy of their own?
I mean, you've just nailed it. I think, we cannot keep talking about, fighting corruption when we still have the same people within the system or within the structure that tends to fight the corruption. Corruption is, like my brother just said just right now. I agree with him that it's embedded in a way within us and within our fundamental growth as human beings, as Africans. These are things that we've already seen growing up. Our parents want to, get something done. They want to get us into a particular school, and we cannot afford it. Probably your grades did not allow you to get into it. Then, they pay for it. You want to, get certain exams done. They pay for it so that you can get those answers quickly before you go and sit down for the exam. And that's how it starts. And that's, when a child can realize that all these things can be bought, they grew up knowing that, I can buy everything. As long as I have money, I can buy everything. And when you have money, just like what you said, is now looking at how can I get more money to be able to buy my way out of, seat, position, or what have you. And, when it comes to, spending so much money into a particular system that has created a lot of corrupt, we might not have you know, an 100% corrupt person, but we have an atom because an atom of corruption in us, because our governments on the continent have designed this, and our parents, and it starts from the very, you know, beginning, from our home, where our parents usually would look into, how do you cut corners? How do you not say? I mean, when you travel abroad and you see how people do, I wonder how, you know, it's as if our government officials just travel to all this place and make sure that all those things that work very well will not come here to work. Because, you know, it's certainly very, very disheartening to have lots of money, lots and lots of money spent on issues that can actually be erased just by restructuring the people who are going to be there. And I think that's very important for us.
Clearly, it is very important. Many thanks, Ty, for that. And Mark, before I get your final comment, let me just play this question back to you once again. And let's say if you're given a choice, who do you think should be blamed for corruption in Africa? Is it the government, foreign interest, or Africans themselves?
You know, this is what I'd like to offer as a solution. One of the things that African governments keep forgetting is being a leader is being a merchant of hope. It is only in hope that that people are able to act in an optimistic manner. They're able to make sober decisions. Scientists have found that if someone is poor, their IQ actually reduces by as much as 20 points. That means you become really, really dumb when you've not fed. So that tells you that that amount of dumbness in Africa occasioned by poverty brings us into a space where we are desperate to get whatever we can to get ahead. The second issue is this, that most Africans do not know a single rich person who's become rich without being corrupt. And the issue then becomes that we sanitize wealth and above character. So your character can be messy, but if you're wealthy, you're fine. So what does that bring us? It brings up into a situation that, number one, we've depressed the IQ of our people, we've depressed the capacity of our people, and then because of our natural resources and our human capital, we've created a platform by which Europeans who are unable to be corrupt within their own countries to swoop into Africa because they know there's no persecution and there's no consequence to what they do. So who do I blame? I blame every single African who takes their vote and votes for a corrupt leader. I blame every leader that chooses to turn a blind eye to corruption. And I blame every Westerner, every Chinese person, whichever nationality you are, that you're taking advantage of an impoverished people because of their poverty to take advantage of them.
Clearly, you're blaming all the three choices that we've put forward. And Ty, who are you choosing to fall with? Are you choosing all of them again, or you have only one side to blame on this current situation?
I blame our educational system. Most of us, and the media. I think most of us learned a lot of things, you know, from the media, from the books, from the TV, from the music that we read, and some of the things also get into, you know, some of these artists who want to, you know, shoot the musical videos and get like big cars and all these things into their musical videos, and those are things that kids watch, and these guys don't even have the money. And you look at our parents and our educational system as well, which have been, you know, chartered just by, you know, corruption. A lot of, you know,
well said,
professionals now.
I believe from your end you can hear the soundtrack there. There is an indication that we are supposed to wrap up. Many thanks, Ty Belgum. He's a representative from African Rising, as well as Mark Bichache, political analyst. Many thanks all of you for your input. Now, I believe it's about time we wrap up the show, and tonight on Bottomline. Actually, before that, let's take our Twitter poll tonight. And we did ask you earlier, who do you blame for corruption in Africa? Is it the government, foreign interest, or African themselves? And let me just go through some of your feedback here very quickly. And Malala says Africans sanitize their leaders on basis of tribe. If we condemn corrupt leaders, then corruption will be history. A very interesting point there. And then Donna Mikal says all of them contribute to corruption in Africa, but the African government is a major shareholder. And then at Vin Amo says corruption is about the mindset, stroke attitude, motive, our morals and core values as a people. Its commitment to law enforcement. Hashtag Bottomline Africa. Many thanks for your input there, Vin Amo. And of course, thank you to all of you who have been watching the show. And tonight on Bottomline, President Donald Trump a while back was met with silence when he congratulated the leaders of African countries on the continent's economic progress. Now, telling them, quote unquote, I have so many friends going to your countries trying to get rich. I congratulate you. They're spending a lot of money. Unfortunately, that's how Africa is seen by a critical majority in the West. Now, plus to get rich, and that's it. And they are right. It is an open secret that Africa is well endowed with immense heritage and wealth. For centuries, the West and now increasingly the East have exploited Africa's natural resources and labor force, not least during the transatlantic slave trade. Now, in the post-colonial era, some foreign governments have been accused of supporting suppressive regimes on the African continent, while foreign companies made immoral profits during deals with the ruling class. Now, if this is not a perfect manifestation of corruption, then what else? Look at it in a bigger picture. When people are corrupt, it means they are stealing something. They are out to siphon money, resources from people fast. And we should ask why they are doing it. They're corrupt because they want more. They just simply can't have enough. New billionaires emerge every day, while at the same time, millions sink to the poverty bracket as inequality levels continue to rise in our generation. But as much as no one has a higher moral ground when it comes to corruption, it doesn't mean that African leaders and government are off the hook yet. President Zuma of South Africa is under fire because of, finish the sentence, corruption. Nigeria, Kenya, Zimbabwe are just but examples of African states that have had their fair share of battles over corruption in government, otherwise referred to as state capture. So as much as we are quick to criticize the West, remember, African leaders also need to style up. And that's the bottom line tonight. Many thanks for watching. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. Remember, this program is aired every Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. See you tomorrow, same place, same time. Bye-bye. Until then, enjoy the rest of your night.